one of the biggest things that I think really enables a growth of a community is intrinsic motivation. So anybody part of that, for any member in a community, should be intrinsically motivated to be part of it and to help make change in it and to progress it. But intrinsic motivation is only sort of captured from a member if you create that sense of belonging for them, if you make it clear what is the objective and why am I part of this community, and if you celebrate some of the successes and share, wow, these people are also part of it, I also want to be part of that.
Welcome to the Community Unlocked podcast hosted by Helena and Olena, where we have in-depth conversations with top-tier community leaders and growth experts. Our goal is to provide you with concrete and actionable advice to help you learn about building, launching, and growing your community. Today, our guest is Mila Jovićević. Mila has been heavily involved in communities catering to startup and scale-up founders, focusing on helping them scale through creating meaningful connections and tackling business growth hurdles. At TechLeap, she's the program lead for the TechLeap's scale-up community. Prior to this, she was a general manager for Eyes, a private network of founders started by the renowned Swiss Happel family. Next to being heavily involved with tech founders, Mila is also an award-winning multimedia artist and has founded an art foundation in Rotterdam to nurture and exhibit a community of artists and designers in the Netherlands. Hi Mila, how are you doing? Thanks so much for coming to our podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're very excited to chat to you today. We really think that your journey in community building is very special and different to some of the people who we've spoken to so far. So without further ado, could you please tell us a bit about your journey into community building?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe just for context, because it's shifted a little bit in terms of what sector and community building I evolved into. But originally, my background is very much in the arts and creative sector. So I did a lot of work in that field and also had a foundation where I built a community for artists and designers to promote them in different ways. But I quickly shifted into more entrepreneurial communities. I was really craving more international people, more ambitious people, people that could really make change. You know, the art world and the sort of tech world, there is a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. So I was very intrigued. So I ended up at this private network that was started by the famous Happel family in Switzerland called Eyes. It's worldwide, founders only. And the premise of it was to meet around the world. So the members would so-called fly into different locations and would have different events and programs there. And that's how they kept connected. And then 4 years after being general manager there, I moved to TechLeap. So this is one of the biggest organizations in the Netherlands, initiated by actually our Prince Constantijn van Oranje. And it's a nonprofit organization that is currently fully funded by the Ministry of Economic Affairs in the country. And it's focused on really empowering the Dutch tech ecosystem. So we do that in many different ways. We don't only have a community for founders, we have also a community for diverse leaders in tech. So it's very much nurturing the conversation on DEI. We have deep tech as a team itself, because deep tech journey is very different than a usual tech software company, for example. And as well as governmental affairs and data. So we, of course, publish all of the reports and so forth. So that's sort of the grand umbrella of TechLeap. And I really lie under the TechLeap community for scale-ups.
Oh yeah, that sounds amazing. And I really like how the country actually approached this in a kind of country level, which is incredible.
Yeah, maybe also for some context in terms of what this scale-up community is about. So we have more than 400 founders right now. We continue to grow. And I think the key differentiator, if you look at the Netherlands as a country, is that we have a lot of startup initiatives. There's incubators, accelerators, hubs, co-working spaces, all kinds of initiatives to support starting. But when it comes to scaling, I would say that's one of our bigger bottlenecks as a country. And if you compare other ecosystems around the world, scaling is where we're not growing at the rate that we should for the better of our economy, so to say. So TechLeap kind of started with that as well, as how can we create the Netherlands as a place to scale and become the next, ASML, have more ASMLs or more Philips of the Netherlands, so to say. And so that means our criteria for that community is not really early stage. It's more like you've had to have raised at least 2 million in funding, or 3 million in funding, sorry, and have at least 20 full-time employees. So the target group for our scale-up community is very much what we call scale-ups, but I have to define what scale-ups are because, for example, scale-up in the US is very different than in the Netherlands. So for us, at minimum, it's that they have at least 20 full-time employees and 3 million in funding and are increasing in size at least 50% annually.
If you can go just also for the context for our listeners regarding like community of scale-ups, just to introduce what type of events or programs or conversation is there.
Yeah. So what we primarily do is we connect these founders through different, let's call them tools, through programs, events, initiatives, and of course also digital platforms. So we enable for them to connect in a meaningful way, but ultimately we're also creating an infrastructure that will help them really tackle these bottlenecks in scaling. So it's not just connecting, but getting the answers to these challenges. And these answers lie in programs like what we call RISE. The RISE program is an 8-week program. It's something what many would probably think is something like a accelerator, but it's not. But with that principle in mind, it is a program with experts, mentors, so it really involves different stakeholders. And then we have monthly sessions, which are sessions on different topics we recognize are issues or pertinent within the community. And we bring in the right expert or seasoned entrepreneur, industry experts that can talk about these issues. And then annually we have 2 bigger events. It's something kind of like a conference style event where all the members meet together. We have content, we have social elements, and of course really creative event management elements, which I can get into later. And then we have an online platform where people can sign up for these things, find each other, find the experts we're involved with, and also involve their C-suite in certain events. That's an important thing. So it's not just founders. Sometimes they can bring in their relevant plus ones, so to say. And we have a Slack channel, so where they all can chat with each other, of course. And then not to mention that we always have certain exceptional events that are not within the sort of regular cadence, but are special, unique opportunities. So maybe we'll go to the US because something popped up and we can bring founders there. And with the network we have, there's always opportunities coming. So it's also our role to identify what opportunities are worth pursuing for our founders. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
That sounds super complex. It seems like there are a lot of things going on there, and we'll get into it in a minute. Just to have an understanding, how many people are there in the community now?
Yeah, so around 400, if not more than 400 founders. And yeah, we continue to grow. It's also worth mentioning that some companies have several founders. So it's less number of ventures, so to say. But that's it. That's the number for now.
You mentioned, as Helena said, a lot of different activities and like it looks complex. For me, it's interesting to know the split between online and offline. And what is your learning from engagement in online and offline, and maybe also reflection on COVID times, how that changed?
So primarily we do everything in person. During COVID, there were some sessions online, but even when COVID was, there was rules where you could keep at a distance, we still ran programs fully COVID proof in person. So we definitely are big advocates on connecting socially in real life, so to say. But it is something we're trying to work on in introducing virtual events. It's just very tricky because one of our core missions is to create these meaningful connections that they create on a social level as well and not just on a transactional level. So it is something we're trying to implement more, but it really is a matter of like, what is it that we want to cover? So usually if we do something online, it has a very clear purpose and structure and objective of that meeting. These people have so many meetings. I think that's something I have to highlight, as you probably know yourself. Founders are so busy scaling their company. So whatever we do introduce or wherever we involve them, it has to be really with high value and high impact for the time that they give us. So when it is an online meeting, it usually is very much structured around some objective. Perhaps it's a meeting with the ministry and we want to give feedback from founders to the government. So it's a structured format. There's, moderators, facilitators that are kind of keeping the whole meeting together. But when it comes to sort of founder-to-founder connections, helping each other out as peers, we find that in-person environment is just a little bit more of a safe and trustworthy environment, because they do share a lot of sensitive information about their businesses, which they want support on, of course.
You mentioned that you want to be mindful of what kind of connections you help people build, and you don't want it to be transactional. Which is very interesting. And you mentioned that online it can be tricky somehow. So I was wondering what your experience has been with, this offline online split, in the sense that how do you feel it is different in that regard?
Well, in any case, what online helps us as a tool is that we can reach founders that might be traveling a lot or are newly parents. So it gives us an opportunity to attract the target group that perhaps cannot engage in person. But the big difference in person is that as a community, we pride ourselves of having a culture of real intimacy and confidentiality. As founders, if you want to create a community that can create meaningful change and for them to get pragmatic input on their challenges, you need to be able to share in a safe space. And to establish that safe space, if anything, you'd want to start off in person so that they all get to know each other, create that safe environment. And then, what we do sometimes explore is the idea of maybe following up an in-person session with an online session, so that they've already met and that sort of ice has been broken. But that's really fundamentally it when it comes to this specific community. It really needs to have that trust barrier opened, so to say. But ultimately, the content of these sessions could be online or offline, actually. On the topic of how we organize our programs and events so that we create meaningful connections, we have several tools we like to kind of reuse and recycle on an event strategy or events building level, but also on a community management level. I think maybe it's worth sharing how we do it with founders. One of the things that sort of ensures that there is meaningful connections, and it's really one of our key differentiating factors compared to other communities, and what we're very good at, is curating the group of people who should be in the room. So we're very clear who's the session for, what level of companies, and then also very clear as to what experts we bring in the room, people who've actually had tangible expertise in scaling from X amount of FTE to, thousands of people. So the way we curate the people in the room really naturally creates a good dynamic in the conversation. So we're very keen on looking into all the profiles and really understanding who should be invited and why, and what contribution they could bring to the table or to the conversation. And we are able to do that because all our members submit certain metrics and data on their company size, their future plans. And it's, again, they do this because they know we will use it to curate and to design the best program. So we need to understand the full profile of who's in our community, not only on an individual level, but also on the company level. But that is something that we noticed. If we keep it too vague and open, it's just not as meaningful. A second thing we also do is we really like to have a combination of very big events, so all hundreds of people coming, to even events where it's 5 people, intimate conversation, and bringing in the right expert or the right moderator to, navigate the discussion. And at big events, we have different tools where we, in a playful manner, so our senior events manager, Davinia, she's really great at it. She really finds creative ways to group people. And again, this is our way of segmenting and curating, but without people being absolutely unaware. We call this sort of like there's a word for it when you like spontaneously meet someone, but really it's all fully planned, right?
Yeah.
And It's basically from a specific colored lanyard you get, and then if you have that color, you go into that room, or specific stickers that have a symbol on it, and it could be an icebreaker or a certain question. We had emoji stickers that you could pick which emoji fits you most, to having specific rooms with activities where you can break the ice quickly and it's very fun. We had mini golf in one room, to having like very deep conversations, sort of like a fireside chat room. So even the space itself that you use can really change the shape of how people interact. And also how people feel safe. And another thing that we also keep in mind is neurodiversity. I mean, I myself can be like overstimulated when you have hundreds of people that you're fully enthusiastic to meet. So you have to have spaces where you can just like decompress, or spaces that are a bit more quiet, to a stage where there's a panel that you just listen. So there's different things we're activating, sort of active listening, active discussion, passively being present, actively being present, creative tools that are more tangible, from stickers to lanyards to specific things you have to bring. Like we've had events where every person who joins should bring a book with a personal note in it, and they leave with someone else's book. So there's like a tangible element to coming to an event as well. So that's one. And I think all these ideas, and I have to emphasize, really stems from that bottom up approach, like founders giving us insights of what they really want and what a meaningful connection is for them, what are their goals, and instigating those new initiatives on behalf of what their inputs are to us, right? And then I think finally, I would say the most important is also, and that comes back again to what are things you need to do when you are launching a community, and that is create some form of I will say, the rules of the game, or values. Make it clear, if you're part of this community, what is the commitment? If it's not financial, it could be time, it could be impact, it could be giving back. And for us, it's very much giving back. So when you're there, you're not there just for yourself, you're there to give back. So that might be hosting something, giving your expertise, could be giving your office for an event, could be offering your C-suite for expertise. There's so many ways. But that's something that we also use as a way of shaping the culture of the community and creating that meaningful connection. So they understand when I come in, the expectation is that I give back and I'm really part of this community, right? And all of those things, even as simple as those stickers, it's all the little tools that I like to see as ways of nurturing this intrinsic motivation. And that's one of the biggest things that I think really enables a growth of a community, is intrinsic motivation. Any member in a community should be intrinsically motivated to be part of it and to help make change in it and to progress it. But intrinsic motivation is only sort of captured from a member if you create that sense of belonging for them, if you make it clear what is the objective and why am I part of this community, and if you celebrate some of the successes and share, wow, these people are also part of it, I also want to be part of that, I also want to be like that person highlighted in the press, right? And understanding what this mission and grand vision is, so you understand as an individual, I'm intrinsically motivated to make that change. And then I think also, like I will highlight several times, is that bottom up approach, having the founders or the members be part of the change and the decision making, or the process of evolving that community, because then you're activating that intrinsic motivation. Long answer, but I hope it also gives some a bit more perspective to things like that.
It sounds for me like it's a very long-term journey participating in this community, and thinking about also offline and building these relations between people. It usually takes some time to build relations, be in the community, and it's a journey of like long-term networking and also communication and building relations, versus online, which is, as you said, like more exact on a certain problem, on a certain topic. It's just like, it sounds like a little bit more transactional, but I would say not, like it's more like productivity meeting rather than a relationship building and networking meeting compared to offline.
Yeah, maybe transactional has a bit of a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But for me, it really meant, okay, what's the objective? Do you fulfill that? What are we here meeting to get today about? Whereas, as like you said it very well, a community is a long-term investment on a personal level as well. You want to feel like you identify with this group. You want to nurture that connection. And often it's also with the community in the long term. It is a form of, yeah, we'll get into that maybe later, but ultimately you want to establish relations that are not just valuable for your business but also for your personal network, personal development, and that can happen only if you connect on that social level. Just like as humans, we cannot be friends with anybody, right? You make friends slowly over time as you build that connection, as you build that trust. So it's the same principle in a community, just like when you make friends on your own.
Totally agree. Building on that, I wonder, how would you describe the difference between building this kind of network of entrepreneurs, the one that you are connected to, and really being part of a community of entrepreneurs? What does it actually mean?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because there's many different initiatives out there in the world that connect founders together. And I think one of the key differentiators, and that's something we also talk about internally in our team, is, first of all, what is a community and how does it differ to a network? Because there's many networks out there you can be a member of, invite only, business clubs, fantastic network you can associate yourself with. But what is a community then? And the core difference, in my opinion, is a community is a collective sense of responsibilities from the members to make some form of change, right? Whether it's to help each other out and have entrepreneurs succeed, fellow entrepreneurs succeed, whether it is for DEI communities, it could be to implement more DEI strategy in tech, like in our diverse leaders in tech community. So it's a level of collective responsibility. It is also a level of co-creation with these members. So members should feel a sense of belonging to, nurture and progress this. In a way, it's a cause. In a way, it's a movement, and to feel a level of social responsibility, and to co-create together as members. So it's very much a bottom-up thing, actually. But in a way, in a nutshell, community is more, I would say, impact-driven, a collective purpose, collective voice, and a network is maybe a platform where you can access entrepreneurs or a specific target group that you identify with.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I totally agree. Talking about collective accountability and responsibility, it's not exactly the topic, but you mentioned earlier that in those meetings, you want to be very productive, you want to be straight to the point, make sure that people spend their time well, because they don't have time most of the time, that there will be moderators and facilitators in meetings. And I wonder if those are the members, or are there people from your organization who facilitate that?
Yeah. So definitely, maybe it's worth just touching on how we map out our community, because that will give you an insight into what roles everybody has in a way. And it also really helps you visualize how this community functions and operates in general, right? And it's very much similar to the principles behind the book, The Startup Community Way. I don't know if you've heard of it before. And they illustrate how a lot of the communities or ecosystems are sort of mapped. And we have actors and factors. Actors are basically which stakeholders are involved, and there's leaders, feeders, and instigators. I'm not going to go into too much theory, but I think it's useful just for the purpose of understanding how this community where I am in functions, right? The leaders of this community should be the founders. They lead this community as to where it progresses. They are the primary stakeholder. And then there's the feeders, sort of who feeds the community. They're mentors, experts, sometimes government in the sense that they're financially feeding us at this point, service providers, sometimes it's media, big corporates, sort of the secondary stakeholders, so to say, that help feed the leaders. And then there's the instigators. Instigators is really the team at TechLeap. It's the ones that instigate initiatives, run them effectively, design them. And in our team, we also have trained facilitators, trained moderators. So we really have the expertise, not only on an events level, but on a program level, to design these interactions as, like you said, as productively as possible and as effectively as possible. So we at TechLeap, we call us sort of the instigators, so to say. But we do have training in that because it's important. It's an important role. But it maybe to highlight the instigators or our team is very much the goal is for us to create and facilitate these programs and sessions, but ultimately the main contributors, the main content should stem from the experts and the founders in the room. So it's not like we position ourselves as the people who have expertise in all the fields they have challenges in. We position ourselves as experts who can facilitate and create a structure and a program that will create meaningful interaction and results to their challenges.
Mm-hmm. So you're basically creating an environment where everything happens.
Yeah, and we are very specific at who we invite, how do we invite them, how do we structure the session. I can get into that even in more details in a second, but in terms of like which people are in the community and how we work together, TechLeap is so to say an instigator. And then of course there's also factors that influence how we work. So what's the capital climate, how are the programs structured, the infrastructure of the economy, what's the density of startups and scale-ups in the country, so those are sort of what we call external influencers as well to always keep in mind. But I think that's with any business, you always do that analysis, of course.
You mentioned that you're very mindful about who you invite into your community. I think it's a topic that people who build community discuss all the time, and it's a very important one. How do you make the selection? I'm sure there are a lot of people who want to be part of it.
Yeah, it's a great question. As I've also been I'm myself in communities, and I've also managed the community before this where there was no criteria, so to say, or no strict quantitative criteria. And then, of course, at TechLeap, we have a very clear criteria in terms of size of company we want to tailor to. So I think for TechLeap, it's in the people's benefit when it's very clear who these programs are catered to. It's a form of, how can I say, it's a way of demonstrating that we can really, if we have a criteria for TechLeap, we automatically demonstrate who we cater to, especially when it comes to programs and events. And if you're tackling certain challenges, someone who has raised 30 million has very different challenges than someone who's just raising their first seed round. So for the purpose of programs and the offerings that we have to understand who it's valued for, or who would get most value out of it, we need to clarify who that person is, right? So the criteria is a useful way of immediately evaluating whether this is of value to you or not if you'd want to join, because of the content and programs we have. On the other hand, the other community I was in before, it was a lot more social interactions. You travel, it wasn't heavy content in terms of programs and expertise and mentors and all those things. It was a much more, let's fly in and we have either a retreat or a forum, open discussions. So it was a wide range from startup to even, unicorn companies, and it worked. But I guess it really much depends on what the value proposition is and how you want to offer it. And I think it needs to be positioned in a way as not as something that we're trying to make it exclusive per se. It's more positioning it, well, this is only of value to you if you fulfill this criteria. I think any network that has this exclusivity, it doesn't come across very inclusive, obviously, or even perhaps diverse. So it's important to position the criteria in the right way so that it doesn't come across that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask about how you make decisions in the community. You mentioned you have the instigators, that's the
Yeah,
team, but of course,
yeah,
I imagine it's not only the team who make
yeah,
decisions.
yeah. Great question. I think with any community, when you, let's just say hypothetically you're about to start a community, you definitely want to identify who the target group is, who do you want to give value to through this community, and also then what change do you want to make as a community? What's the mission and vision of the community? What's the objective? Or what is the desired outcome of this community? Because we mentioned that community is all about co-creation, having a collective purpose. What is that purpose? But then behind all of that, if you're about to launch a community or if you're running one right now, you need to outline the governance structure. So who's the decision making, who is the leader, and who is contributing in sort of the governance, so to say. And I think, especially in a community for founders, I'm a huge advocate that you have a founder advisory board or a founder board that will overlook how the community is progressing, that could give input in the eyes of the founder, because as instigators, many of us are not founders or have not been founders. So we need their eyes on these things. We need their voice. And where I was previous to TechLeap, it was fully run by founders, and the HQ were people like me who would run all the logistics and strategic progression of the community. But the founders were the voices of the entire community. So should there be any big changes, and in that case, it was prior to TechLeap, it was more of a like membership model. Should there be changes in the membership, those advisory board needs to say yes or give input on that. At TechLeap, we have a founder advisory board as well. So it's founders that we can count on for certain input and feedback on anything we're launching or changing. And it's also a board that we can rely on that can help us with certain connections and introductions, for example. But at TechLeap, because of the nature of our organization, it is governmentally funded. We also have a leadership team of TechLeap of all. So maybe it's like you said, it's quite complex. So TechLeap itself is a huge umbrella. So we have a leadership team running TechLeap, but the TechLeap scale-up community has a founder advisory board. And TechLeap itself has a board as a foundation as well. And of course, it's important not to forget that we have Prince Constantine, who's a huge advocate on a public level for our brand mission. So in a way, he's also, of course, an important stakeholder in our governance system, so to say.
I'm curious to know, for commercial communities, it's understandable how you measure success, but for non-profit community, how do you measure success?
Maybe before we go into how we measure success, I think it's even worth noting how does it differ when something is for profit and non-profit. My two experiences so far is one community that was also nonprofit, but was funded by membership fees and donations from members. So very much member driven financially. And TechLeap currently is fully funded by the government. So I think let's just first compare those two before we go into a for-profit mindset. But the first one, you could see when members are funding it, there's even more of a sense of collective responsibility because it's them putting out of pocket, them investing in this community. But there's also a sense of, well, I'm a member, I pay a membership fee, so can I expect these services? So there's also that mindset of service, which changes, of course. On a government level, and sorry, before as well, with the membership fees, the founders really speak for themselves, actually, because they're paying as a member, right? In TechLeap, it's a collective. Almost everything is fully funded by the government, so member or founders have access to everything for free. So in that way, the tricky part here, especially being with the government, is that the founders, yes, they have a collective voice, but the government is funding it. So you can never really be a fully independent voice in that case. So far, we haven't really noticed the conflict of interest, but it definitely doesn't empower the community to the maximum potential that it could be empowered, right? And I think also there's opportunities perhaps missed when there's only one funding partner. So at TechLeap, we're actually working on having alternative funding in the coming years. And that's something we are really testing. And what you notice as well, and this comes up a lot in the conversation, is if you have sponsors, for example, or partners, one of the things we constantly get feedback from in founders is they're very much afraid that when there's a partner or a sponsor, let's just say, I don't know, a big corporate sponsors an activity or a program, that it compromises the trust environment, that it compromises the peer-to-peer connections, the founder network. So it's the culture could shift because it's becoming sponsored and it's not just founders to founders interacting. And there's also perhaps different interests. Of course, there is if you have sponsors, right? So it can change the dynamic of the conversation in a session or a program. So we are closely now testing on how to implement partners and sponsors without compromising any of the value and culture we've already established. And for profit, I have to be honest, I don't have much experience in that field, but I can imagine there's also many different interests and completely different complex systems that come with it. But those are the two aspects that I have experience with so far.
Are there people who join who don't like that the government is getting information on them? Because I can imagine that happening, and I might be wrong, but I would be very suspicious.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth noting. Like I think in sociology, we're like an arm's length body. So we are funded by the government, but we're not a government initiative. So we are still independent. So yeah, I would say the only involvement of the government is them funding and requiring probably some reporting on a leadership level of where we're standing. But any data we have is actually fully confidential. It's also not even very clear for them, all the founders that are involved. So luckily we can operate independently to that level.
Okay.
Otherwise it probably would be very problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in one of the events organized for the Scale Up community, and I remember also Prince Constantine also kind of participate in these big events, which is like a couple times per year, which gives I do not agree with you, Helena, that it's like a suspicious. It gave you a very nice feeling of protection. This is how I felt. Like we created the space for you guys to be successful, and we are supporting this as a government. We have no expertise as a government how to make your company successful. So that is why here, guys, you can learn from each other. You have experts, and we kind of enable this. And this nice feeling, it's very nice feeling, I would say. And I went to this event, and I wanted to stay like a couple of hours just to be at time at home to say goodnight to my son. But I stayed till 11 or something because it was so nice actually, and I spoke with so many people. It was like really the place you'd like to be.
I think that's one of the benefits. If you have a business model by which the founders don't have to financially contribute or not only be reliant on financial contribution from members, is that there is a sense of freedom and autonomy as an organization to evolve and to co-create with the community. I mean, like maybe I can touch into this already, but like communities are not like any product or service. It's such an organic process. It's something that there's no formula for. And to have that privilege to have a government support this, so it really is a catalyst to growing an ecosystem in the country. So yeah, it's really in the benefit on beyond the founders, but also on an economic level, the jobs that we can help support being created by all these companies, the innovations that happen that can actually make change on a social and economic level. So it's a privilege to have this. And I think also if you look at different ecosystems around the world, those that have government supporting it, they are growing the fastest and are one of the most successful ones as well. But something we don't perhaps do compared to where Silicon Valley is very powerful is the VC and venture capital and how they're influencing the ecosystem. That's a lot more advanced, I would say, in like the US and other countries.
maybe a question for the community and other community managers. Your advice, if you are building a community, like peer-to-peer learning community, I think this is the best example. What would be the way to go? How you can build a vision, strategy?
Yeah, I think it's very tricky to give like a formula or even an overview of steps to take. At least in my experience now, I noticed that it's such a organic process, but you need to start somewhere, of course. And I think the most important is that you really understand and also communicate it and externally position it very well as to what the purpose of this community is and who is invited to join, or for whom is it, right? And then from there on, also, like I mentioned, the governance system, who will be influencing the decisions, how are decisions made, and who again outline those, actors and factors that are influencing that community for the beginning. I think you have to start somewhere, but I want to really push and highlight and emphasize that is very likely to change, given the nature of any community. It's being always very complex. I think, if anything, you have to go into it with a mindset of constantly adapting, iterating, testing, learning, and having that complete non-linear approach. I mean, I've had experience where I'll have one dinner with some founders, for example, and out of that discussion, entire new approach to something comes out of it, and you just have to take that opportunity because a member wants to offer it, right? So you have to be a bit also opportunistic, seek out what the community can offer and use that to shape the community. So really, it's an sort of what I call an anti-fragile mindset. Nothing can break you. You can just keep growing. And you have to have that long-term thinking. I think you said, Ellen, as well in the beginning. Really, you think 20 years from today, every day, right? Because a community, it's a group of people you're trying to nurture. It's not a product or service that has demand and supplies. It's human beings with different desires, motivations, experiences that you're trying to collectively put together and empower. So I feel like it's something you need to organically nurture. But the most important is to have a clear skeleton. Okay, what is the objective of this community? Who's in it? Who's welcome to join? And what are you offering? And that offering can change, but you need to be very clear and communicate that externally, so that whenever you're trying to navigate a group of 500 people, they know where to go. So if anything, there is that service level. So it is a service to a degree, but how it evolves and the strategic outlook is very much organic and nonlinear. So often I've also been in a community where founders are leading it on an operational level, and you see it doesn't really match up because it's not a product or service. It's sometimes that you just cannot have all the strategy fully planned out. You have to have a way of adapting. But and I think it also takes quite a specific type of people to run communities. So you can see in our team, it is people that have such intrinsic interest in this topic. It is people that have very good social skills. You're connecting with people. You can recognize if something is an opportunity, or if people need specific connections. So it's also building the right team around it that can help grow that community, and that can understand the sector that you're nurturing and helping grow. So you also asked about measuring success, and I think for entrepreneurial communities, it's always a very big question, and you can see that across all ecosystems in the world when there's reports like, how do you measure a successful community of founders? I think there is no real answer to that, and it's a bit of a conversation all over the world about this. But there are several things that I always encourage that you definitely look into, and at least this is for founder communities, right? One way is to first have a strategic approach to structuring the changes that are happening, that are organic, but that are happening. And one that's very common, and I think that a lot of nonprofits use, is the theory of change. So whoever is listening, definitely look into that. It's a very useful framework that helps you structure the constant change that's happening in a community, the different decisions that need to be made. And that helps you use some form of framework that you can also measure in the long term, right? But on a pragmatic level, I would say it's traditional feedback loops. So qualitative input, I would say, is more important than quantitative. For every program, of course, we have NPS ratings and stuff. But actually, what made the biggest difference is when I asked them obligatory qualitative input on the experts or certain sessions. And that was more useful than the number because they gave some ideas to me. They gave me some tips that actually they wanted to see more of. But also having conversations as a team at TechLeap, we really emphasize going on calls, having a personal connections with founders to let them open up, because sometimes you'd ask them for feedback, they just don't have that upfront. But in specific events, when it's a bit more already, we had a few drinks or it's been, broke that ice already, then you just casually ask them for feedback. It's just more genuine. So as a team, we constantly try to get that on a personal level as well. But also I think what we've done before, and it's more of that what we call relational approach, is literally mapping out the number of connections we've made. And it's just attaching some form of number. And in our case, it was the number of connections made, unique connections, non-unique per event, per annual connections, etc. And then, of course, measurements of some metrics. So, and this is where it gets tricky because, yes, the community members at TechLeap, they have grown probably by a certain percentage in FTEs, full-time employees, or in the amount of funding they've raised, or in revenue. But we can't per se attribute that growth to from our programs and sessions. We can't say that because of these sessions they grew X amount. It's many other things that influence that. But we can at least proudly say that these are the people we are involved with and that they have been part of our community as they grew. But that's the tricky part. You can never say because of us, they have grown this much. If anything, we can at least say we contributed to their growth. But it's important to have these metrics, even just thinking about how many jobs they've created. We are nurturing a community that is changing those elements in society and in our economy. So it's important to have those numbers, not to necessarily to measure success, but also to demonstrate to society, especially if you're governmentally funded, what impact are you making? And I guess for profit as well, what impact are you making? And who are you addressing? So yeah, that's how we kind of measure success, so to say.
Exactly. I think impact is so important. It's very similar to commercial communities. And I wanted to add also, I was thinking about the community of founders, and also basically you cannot really grow the community, and this is not your goal to make, instead of 400, 1,000 members. This is not the goal, which is very different from like product community, for example. And then but I think how you can understand, do you create a value, is also the number of inbound you have. So basically, if the founders recommending you to another founders who is not in your network, and they are coming to you and they are telling you, I'd like to join, so this is like a huge kind of indication for me of that you are creating value, basically creating this word of mouth loop. So people are coming to you, but not you are coming to people. And the more you have of this, the more successful your community are, because this is your kind of voice and heard of community speaking to same type of people.
Yeah, definitely. Or also the number of initiatives that were launched fully by community members.
Yeah.
If it's just instigators running everything, it depends again. If it's a service-oriented membership club, of course they expect that someone does it for them. But if it's really community-driven, then it's also success metrics. If the more initiatives are instigated by founders or members themselves.
I agree. I totally agree with you, Elena. And that's why I highlighted what you said. I circled it, mapping up unique connections that you've made and kind of measuring it, adding it as impact is where it all begins for me, because these unique connections, these meaningful connections that you were talking about earlier, is what makes things happen for me. I mean, it's not the only thing, obviously, but it's at the heart of it, totally.
And sort of the second level to it, where we had a lot of challenges, is like, how do you describe what a meaningful connection is? So I could map out physically who met in which room, right? But how meaningful some of these connections were, and if they actually resulted to something after, was something where we were chasing constantly for input from, and we had to come to terms that we will never have a true picture of it. But it's something that we at least keep our eyes out for, right? And it's something we look at. But yeah, like I said, with communities, the nature of any metrics or measurements of success is never as data driven as it should be, or you want it to be, or you wish for it to be, just because we're dealing with human connections.
Absolutely. Totally agree with what you just said. And on this beautiful note, unfortunately, our conversation's coming to an end. Thank you so much for sharing so much about your unique experience. I'm sure it's going to be interesting for a lot of people. We've written down a lot of things that we're going to come back to and think about and research. Thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope it was also useful for anybody doing any form of community management. I'm happy to stay in touch or be in contact with anyone who's interested to follow up with more conversations.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and the best way to connect with you, I assume LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Okay,
for
perfect.
Sure.
We will share that.
We'll share. Thank you so much.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Have a
Thanks.
wonderful
Thank you.
day, and we will be in touch.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you so much for listening. If our conversation resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Your ratings and reviews are invaluable in helping us reach more like-minded people. You can find all our episodes and learn more about the show at communityunlocked.substack.com. See you in the next episode.